This is a block of cheese, and this is over 1.4 billion pounds of it, hidden in caves by the United States government. The story of why it's there is one of the most absurd financial stories you've never heard. And by the end of this video, you will understand the truth. For a moment, I need you to truly appreciate the scale of this. 1.4 billion pounds is the weight of more than 3 Empire State Buildings. If you were to slice it up, you could build a solid wall of keys from New York City to Los Angeles. And the government was paying millions of dollars a year just to keep it cold. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a real, documented, and unbelievably expensive government program. And it's one of the clearest examples of a powerful, invisible force that secretly shapes our entire economy. To solve the mystery of the cheese, we have to go back in time to a moment when a group of very smart people tried to solve a simple problem and accidentally created a monster. Our story begins in the 1970s, and there's a crisis brewing in the American heartland. For generations, the family dairy farm was an icon of the American dream. But by the 1970s, thanks to new technology, our farms had become too good at their jobs. They were producing a tsunami of milk, far more than people could actually drink. And basic economics tells you what happens next. When supply massively outstrips demand, prices crash. For America's dairy farmers, this was a catastrophe. They were facing bankruptcy. So the government decided to step in. They had to save the family farm. They came up with a plan, a simple, logical, seemingly perfect solution. This solution was called a, quote, price support. It meant the government legally forbade the price of milk from falling below a certain level. It created a price floor. If the market price dropped, the government promised to buy all the surplus milk at the higher guaranteed price. Stabilize prices, save the farmers. What could possibly go wrong? Well, the government had forgotten about one critical thing: incentives. By guaranteeing a high price for milk, they sent a loud, clear signal to every dairy farmer in America. Produce as much milk as you possibly can. And they did. The milk surplus didn't just continue, it exploded. Farmers were now operating with zero risk, knowing the government was a guaranteed buyer at a great price. So now the government had a new problem, a much bigger problem. They were now legally obligated to buy a biblical flood of milk that nobody wanted. And this is where our mystery takes a very weird turn. Because the government couldn't just store the milk, it spoils. They had to convert this ocean of milk into something solid, something that could last forever. So they started making cheese, processed American cheese. And that is how the cheese mountain was born. The US government had accidentally become the single largest cheese producer on planet Earth. But you see the problem, right? They had simply traded one surplus for another. They had solved the milk problem, but created a brand new and much weirder problem, the cheese problem. They couldn't sell it because that would crash the market, and they couldn't just destroy it. So what happened next? So the government is now the unwilling owner of a cheese empire. If you can't sell it and you can't destroy it, what's the only option left? You give it away. And this was the birth of a culinary icon, government cheese. It was a 5-pound brick of processed cheese food, wrapped in a simple cardboard box. They distributed it through food banks, schools, and social welfare programs across the country. The goal was to chip away at the cheese mountain while providing food to people in need. Again, a simple fix. A win-win, right? But here is where the law of unintended consequences returns. What happens to the cheese industry when the government starts giving away billions of pounds of cheese for free? Exactly. People stop buying it. Every pound of free government cheese a family received was a pound they didn't buy from a store. This crushed commercial demand for cheese, which hurt the very same dairy farmers the government was trying to protect. It created less demand for their milk, which created an even bigger surplus. They were now trapped in a perfect, self-sustaining loop of absolute absurdity. The program designed to solve the problem was now actively making the problem worse. And the cheese mountain just continued to grow. They were trapped. So how did they ever escape? The truth is, they didn't really escape, at least not for a very long time. But before we get to the end of America's cheese saga, you need to understand something even crazier. This was not just a weird American problem. It was happening all over the world. While the US was drowning in cheese, European governments were drowning in butter. At its peak, the European butter mountain weighed over 1.2 million tons. That's the weight of more than 10 modern aircraft carriers in pure butterfat. So how did Europe end up with its own, equally absurd mountain of surplus? The story starts with a deep, collective trauma, the memory of World War II. For an entire generation of Europeans, The memory of starvation and food shortages was burned into their minds. So when they formed the European Economic Community, their number one priority was food security. They created a system to ensure they would never, ever have to rely on other countries for food again. It was called the Common Agricultural Policy, or CAP. And at its heart was a familiar idea, the price support. They guaranteed a high intervention price for butter, a noble cause, and a simple fix. And by now, you can probably guess what happened next. European farmers, just like their American counterparts, responded to the incentive with massive overproduction. The result was a butter surplus of unimaginable scale and a massive headache for the government. And their attempts to get rid of it were even more creative than the American cheese giveaways. First, they tried schemes like Christmas butter, selling the surplus to their own citizens at a huge discount during the holidays. But this barely made a dent in the mountain. So they got desperate. They started selling hundreds of thousands of tons of it to the Soviet Union at a massive, politically explosive discount. Think about this. European taxpayers were paying a high price for butter, only to subsidize its sale to their Cold War adversary. The cost of this entire program was staggering, running into billions of dollars per year just to buy and store the unwanted butter. It was a perfect echo of the American cheese crisis. A system designed to help was now just a machine for turning taxpayer money into a useless frozen mountain of fat. So how did they finally solve it? Unlike the Americans, they used a much blunter instrument. In 1984, they introduced milk quotas. The government literally told every country and every farmer exactly how much milk they were allowed to produce. It was a painful, top-down measure that was fought for years by farmers. And it showed the immense political difficulty of undoing a simple fix once a system becomes dependent on it. But the butter mountain wasn't even the most surreal surplus in Europe, because at the very same time, the very same system was creating something even more poetic, the wine lake. And yes, that is exactly what it sounds like. At its worst, Europe was dealing with a surplus of billions of liters of wine. That's enough to fill over 3,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. But the motive for this surplus was different. This wasn't about post-war food security. This was about protecting the powerful and culturally significant wine industries of countries like France and Italy. It was the same simple fix, a guaranteed minimum price for wine to protect traditional producers. And the result was a flood of cheap, often undrinkable plonk that nobody wanted to buy. This left the European government with a truly bizarre problem. What do you do with a lake of bad wine? Their solution was a masterpiece of economic insanity. They started the Crisis Distillation Program. They spent hundreds of millions of euros a year buying the wine, and then turning it into industrial alcohol. They were paying once to buy the wine, and then paying again to destroy it. It was the world's most expensive recycling program. But that wasn't even the final stage of the absurdity. They finally created vine pool schemes, programs where they paid farmers millions to literally rip their own grapevines out of the ground. Let's stop and think about that last image. The system had come full circle. The same system that paid farmers to produce wine was now paying them to destroy the very capacity to produce it. The cheese mountain, the butter mountain, the wine lake. These aren't just isolated stories of incompetence. They are proof of a universal law. When you take a complex system and apply a blunt, simple fix, you don't solve the problem. You create a new, unexpected, and far more absurd problem somewhere else. This is the verdict of our investigation. The culprit wasn't a politician. It was a flaw in thinking. It's a phenomenon called the Cobra effect. The cure becomes worse than the disease. This flaw is called first-order thinking, looking only at the immediate consequence and ignoring everything that comes after. The antidote is a mental model used by the world's best strategists and investors, second-order thinking. It's the disciplined habit of asking the most important question in all of decision-making. And then what? A first-order thinker sees the simple, immediate solution. A second-order thinker sees the chain of consequences that solution will unleash. This isn't just about government policy. This is about your life, your career, and your finances. Every major financial mistake is almost always a failure of second-order thinking. The story of the government cheese is a cautionary tale, written in processed cheese, reminding us that the simple, obvious solution is often the most dangerous one of all. This entire story, a small, well-intentioned decision that spiraled into a multi-billion-dollar financial disaster that nobody saw coming, is a perfect real-world example of what is called a Black Swan event. These are the kinds of unpredictable, history-shaping events that catch almost everyone off guard. And studying the scars of these past disasters is the single most powerful way to develop the judgment needed to navigate the financial crises of the future. It's the entire reason I spent years researching and writing my book, The Black Swan Investor. It deconstructs history's greatest financial disasters to give you a practical framework for building a truly resilient financial fortress. You can find it on Amazon by scanning the QR code on your screen now, or by using the link in the description below. But that leaves us with one final lingering question in our investigation. So what happened to all the cheese? By the early 1980s, the problem had become a national embarrassment. The Reagan administration realized the situation was unsustainable. They passed new farm legislation that, for the first time in decades, began to slowly and painfully lower the price supports. It took years, but by gradually reducing the incentive for overproduction and continuing the massive donation programs, they were finally able to shrink the cheese mountain. Today, the dairy price support program is gone, and the Great American Cheese Mountain is finally just a memory. This entire bizarre journey is a powerful lesson, a reminder that the world is a complex place. We can't always predict the future, but we can learn from the past. We can choose to be thinkers who anticipate consequences and build for resilience. Since you've stuck around till the end of this video, it's clear you found this topic intriguing. And I think you'll definitely want to check out the videos popping up on your screen now. They explore even more fascinating topics in finance that might just challenge your perspective. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more videos that break down complex and foundational topics in finance. Thanks for watching.